During this session, we shall be discussing about the philosophy of the marginalized. It's an important topic when we talk about philosophy, particularly in the Indian context. I have with me two experts to discuss on this very important topic. To my left, we have Dr. S. Luthnathan. He is head of the Department of Philosophy at Airul Anand College in Madurai, which is with the Madurai Kamaraj University. He has about 23 years of experience of teaching philosophy, and his area of specialization is Indian social philosophy of liberalization, and he is a specialist on Ambedkar and Dalit studies. To my right, we have Dr. Silvaraj. He is a professor of philosophy at Loyola College, Chennai. He has a PhD in philosophy, and his area of specialization again is Dalit consciousness. He has done his studies from Loyola University in Chicago. As I said in the beginning, our topic of discussion this afternoon is on philosophy of the marginalized. So to begin with, I would request Dr. Luthnathan to kindly explain to us about the meaning and relevance of the philosophy of the marginalized.
Thank you, Professor Thomas. The question of the philosophy of the marginalized refers two important sense. We need to take into account the connotative dimension of the question of marginalized and the denotative dimension of the marginalized. Specifically, with reference to the Indian context, the question of marginalized applies to the issue of the Dalits. Dalit connotatively means something, denotatively it means something. Connotatively it means the issue of suffering, the sensibility of unjust suffering met to the people who are called Dalits. Denotatively it means refers to the category of the people. Thus, philosophy of the marginalized, specifically with reference to the people who are called Dalits, has got two important philosophical significance. On the one side, it is a response to the problem of unjust exploitation. And the other side, it's a struggle for a liberative philosophy. In that sense, what is the philosophical significance with Dalit philosophy of liberation? That is, it problematizes the very issue called philosophy of liberation within the Indian philosophical context. In that way, philosophy of the marginalized, especially with reference to the Dalit category of people, in the context of casteism and patriarchy, becomes vital within our Indian cultural context.
Well, thank you, Dr. Luthnathan. Having spoken about the relevance of the philosophy of the marginalized, perhaps Dr. Silvaraj could highlight on what is meant by the identity of a Dalit.
Thank you, Professor Thomas. When we speak of an identity of marginalized people, especially with reference to Dalits, we mean the identity comes out of a consciousness which constructs one's identity. That is basically a consciousness which is constructed through experience. So this is basically Dalit experience becomes the embodiment of a Dalit consciousness and Dalit identity. Then we need to know what is Dalit experience. The central experience of Dalit is one of a social exclusion. Exclusion in various aspects of life, social, political, economic, cultural, religious. So everywhere they feel they are excluded from the main society. So that is a basic reality, that is a basic experience of the collective community called Dalit. That is where they form their consciousness, and this consciousness forms the identity. when I speak of identity, there are two, three ways of understanding identity. That is how I am looked at by others, and how I am, and what I want others to know me, or how I want others to know me. So Dalit identity basically means how I want others to know me, or how I want others to know who I am. So that is basically Dalit identity. From the experiences, what we see, Dalits are looked at as a dirty thing. When Jaya Subramanian explains in the school and in the colleges, when people know that she is a Dalit, an SC student, her own peers look at her as a dirty thing. And again, when Esumariam speaks of a Dalit identity, some three areas majorly these people are discriminated against. That is their right to land, a right to education, and a right to housing. These are the three major areas where Dalits are discriminated, and this embodies the whole life of Dalits. And again, when we say Dalit identity, we mean how these people are thrown out of the society. So Dalit identity from the point of view of the Dalits is one of brokenness, is one of thrown awayness. This is how Dalit identity is there. But as a category of people, now they can test this identity. Now we are not just thrown out of the society, we are the people who would like to empower ourselves. So it's basically the dialectic between being thrown away and also being empowering oneself.
Well, having heard from these two experts about the meaning of marginalized people, the identity of the marginalized, it gives us a feeling that a topic like the marginalized, when we talk in the context of philosophy, it makes it very easy for us to understand that it is not a difficult subject. And given that background, we as academics as well as students in various disciplines must take extra interest to learn the subject of philosophy in its various contexts. Now, coming back to our topic of discussion, let us try to understand the factors that are necessary for constructing Dalit consciousness. Perhaps Dr. Ludnathan could start the discussion.
That's an interesting question. The question of what are those factors that go to construct the Dalit consciousness. There should be multiple factors that go to constitute or construct the Dalit consciousness. Probably to simplify, we can classify these principles that constitute the Dalit consciousness in terms of two important aspects, the internal and the external. By the internal, I mean the consciousness that is being constructed by various factors, philosophical factors themselves. By external, I mean the cultural factors that go to constitute the Dalit consciousness. So it becomes a very relevant inquiry in philosophy to consider the philosophy of the marginalized from the standpoint of the Dalits. The internal factors, for example, we need to account the Dalit consciousness at two levels. Consciousness as subjugated, consciousness as dominated, consciousness as domesticated, consciousness as oppressed. Another level of consciousness with reference to Dalits, the Dalit consciousness or the consciousness of the subjugated people. One is their consciousness is subjugated, another one the consciousness of the subjugated against this subjugation. That is, in other words, there is a double negation process that operates in the philosophical setting of the question of Dalit consciousness. It negates the very negation. Whatever philosophy, whatever social reality, whatever cultural factor, whatever economic, political factors or historical factors that went into constitute the whole context of caste domination and heavily shouldered on the shoulders of the Dalits as untouchables, has to be what we call eroded. So Dalit consciousness is a moment of restoration of those consciousness that has been subjectivized or objectivized. So in that sense, I would look at the question of Dalit consciousness from these two angles, the internal and the external. The internal from two aspects, consciousness as subjugated consciousness and consciousness that works against the very subjugations in the layers, in the history or in the layers of Indian philosophical cultural tradition. Probably the external dimension, Selva could highlight that.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenathan. Now, we just now saw how the internally a person personalizes that kind of consciousness. There are also certain factors which influence constructing Dalit consciousness at the external level. One of them is material prosperity. A consciousness constructed based upon one's material life, how rich or how poor, what type of a society he lives in, whether in a very poor locality, in a slum, or in a what you call in a colony, or he lives in a very posh area. So these external realities also influence constructing Dalit consciousness. Now also there are other external factors like the cultural symbols, the art, the dance, the music, which make a great impact upon constructing Dalit consciousness. When I was talking to Dr. Jayakaran, who was the director of Dalit Resource Center in Madurai, he was saying that we use culture as the symbol of Dalit liberation. Culture can be used as a symbol of Dalit liberation. And he said at two levels. One is this first empowers the person through cultural expressions. When we beat the parai, beat the parai, the drum, the sound, the music, the rhythm, that makes a sense of a belonging, a sense of empowered self within the person. So that constructs a Dalit consciousness. Again, he also said, through these cultural symbols, Madurai is a place where they come every year for a cultural night, Dalit cultural night, where it brings different communities of Dalit origin, different groups. They come there, they leave aside all the differences, then feel one there as Dalit unity, as a unified group. So that also constructs the Dalit consciousness. So far, who understood himself or herself as a disempowered self feels that this collective consciousness is taking place there. So this way, this cultural symbols play a very crucial role in constructing Dalit consciousness. I don't want to deal with so many other things, but these two are very major things besides the location. The other also decides, so who is my opponent? Who is my enemy? He also decides upon me, also impacts upon me what type of consciousness I construct. So that's also very important. So the other also decides and determines what type of a consciousness I construct within me. Is a submissive consciousness or liberative consciousness?
Well, Professor, I have one more question to you. Can you briefly explain the social profile of Dalit problem?
Yeah, the social profile is very, very important for a Dalit because these are a kind of major agents or major stimulant where Dalit consciousness is constructed. It's like a lab where a person constructs his own consciousness either in the submissive side or in the liberative side or the assertive side. I give just one example what happened in a small village in Ramna district near Madurai, Irinjirai. Basically a Dalit who went to a washerman to wash his clothes and press it. But that particular washerman does the whole work for the caste people, not for the Dalit people. So when he went and then gave the